All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time we're going to be looking at angels from a biblical perspective.
Okay.
And this is from a YouTube video called The Complete History of Angels, Cherubims, Seraphims, Watchers, and Lucifer from the channel Biblical Emotions Narrated.
Very cool. I'm excited.
Yeah, so this one is... This one's a real deep dive. It's
I love it.
It really kind of turns some of the ideas we might have about angels upside down.
It does, yeah. So this video really kind of challenges those traditional images of angels that we often see.
Right.
Like with the harps and the white robes.
Yeah.
And it kind of suggests that doesn't really align with how angels are described in the Bible.
Yeah, it's almost like we've got a very sort of sanitized version of angels.
Right.
This video reminds us that in biblical accounts, they're incredibly powerful beings. They can like wipe out armies. They can move massive stones.
That's right.
They're almost like these forces of nature.
Absolutely. And the video even uses the example of the angel Gabriel standing in God's presence.
Right.
Which is something no human could survive.
Right.
So that really emphasizes the just the sheer power of angels and their connection to the divine.
Definitely. It really makes you rethink those little cherub decorations you see.
Sure.
So speaking of cherubim, this video dives into those as well. And they're definitely not what I pictured.
No, not at all.
At all.
The video really draws on the prophet Ezekiel's vision from the Bible, which gives this very vivid and somewhat strange description of cherubim.
Yeah.
So they're described as having 4 faces, a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle.
Wow.
They also have 4 wings, human hands, and feet that look like polished bronze.
Oh.
Yeah, it's not exactly the typical angel imagery.
No, and what's really interesting is the video points out that cherubim were created before Earth and all those creatures whose faces they bear. It's like, how is that even possible?
It is a fascinating paradox, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It really suggests that there's a deeper connection between the earthly and heavenly realms.
Yeah.
Almost like a blueprint that existed before our world even took shape. Some scholars believe that it could symbolize the vastness and the all-encompassing nature of God's creation.
Right.
That it encompasses all these different aspects of life.
I've never thought of it that way. But that's really interesting. It makes those descriptions even more intriguing, I think. Like, imagine seeing one, a cherubim, firsthand. That would be amazing.
Would be pretty awe-inspiring, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And maybe a little terrifying, too, given that they're guardians of God's presence. They're not just there for decoration. Right. They have a very specific purpose.
All right. So we've got these multi-faced cherubim, but the video also talks about another type of angel, Seraphim.
Yes.
Who seem to be all about intense, almost fiery devotion to God.
That's right. And the word seraphim actually means burning or blazing.
Okay.
Which I think is very fitting.
Yeah.
They're described as having 6 wings, 2 to cover their faces in reverence, 2 to cover their feet in humility, and 2 for flight, always ready to serve.
Mm-hmm. And their most famous line, the one that echoes throughout Scripture, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory."
Yes.
Powerful stuff.
It is. And the video even points out that it wasn't just a quiet utterance.
Right.
This was a declaration so powerful that it shook the foundations of the temple.
Wow, that gives me chills. But it raises a question for me. If these seraphim, being so close to God, are filled with this kind of burning passion for worship, what does that say about how we as humans should approach our own relationship with God?
That is a really good question.
Yeah.
And I think it's one that this video implicitly asks us to consider. Are we bringing that same level of passion and humility to our own worship?
Yeah, it really makes you think about what genuine worship is all about.
It does.
And it's not just the intensity, but also the humility, as you mentioned.
Right. So the seraphim, despite their power and magnificence, they cover their faces and feet before God.
Right.
It's a powerful reminder that true worship involves acknowledging our own smallness in the face of God's greatness.
Yeah.
And it's a good reality check for us humans.
Yeah.
Who can sometimes get a little caught up in our own importance.
Definitely. So speaking of learning from Seraphim, the video actually goes on to highlight some specific lessons we can glean from how they worship.
Right.
What kind of lessons are those?
So one of the lessons is unceasing worship.
Okay.
The seraphim aren't just praising God on certain days or during specific rituals. Their devotion is continuous. It's woven into the very fabric of their existence.
So it's not just about carving out time for worship. It's about an attitude, right? An attitude of worship.
Right. And the second lesson focuses on God's purifying grace.
Okay.
And the video mentions the story of Isaiah the prophet.
Okay.
whose lips were touched by a seraphim with a burning coal to cleanse him and prepare him for his mission.
Right. I remember that.
It's a pretty intense image.
Yeah.
But it beautifully illustrates how God refines and prepares us for the tasks that he calls us to. It reminds us that even in our imperfection, God can work through us, shaping us into vessels for his purposes.
It's like he's saying, don't worry about being perfect. Just be willing to let me work through you.
Exactly.
I love that. Now, shifting gears a bit, the video also dives into the concept of God's holiness, using the seraphim's constant proclamation as a starting point.
Right, and it stresses that understanding God's holiness is fundamental to understanding all his other qualities.
Okay.
His love, his justice, his mercy, they all flow from this core attribute of absolute purity and perfection.
So it's like the foundation upon which everything else is built.
Exactly. And the video connects this back to us as viewers by highlighting the biblical call to be holy, for I am holy.
Right.
And it's not just a theological concept, it's a call to action. It invites us to consider how this profound truth should shape our daily lives and choices.
It's like a blueprint for living a life that reflects God's character.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we've talked about cherubim and seraphim, these incredible beings with these unique appearances and roles.
Right.
But what about the angels we hear about more often? The ones, depicted as protectors and guides.
Yeah, that's where this deep dive takes us next.
Okay.
Highlighting this idea that God assigns angels to watch over his people. And then briefly mentions the specific named angels that we find in the Bible. Michael, Gabriel, Lucifer, and Abaddon.
Right. Those names definitely ring a bell.
Yeah.
Especially Michael and Gabriel. But I'm curious to hear more about their specific roles.
Yeah, that's definitely something we can explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll delve into the stories and the symbolism surrounding those named angels.
Okay.
And we'll also look at how this video connects the idea of angelic protection to our own lives.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Okay, so picking up where we left off, let's talk a little bit more about these named angels. The video specifically mentions Michael, Gabriel, Lucifer, and Abaddon.
Yeah, those are some big names in the angelic world. I have to admit, I'm especially curious about Michael. I always kind of picture him as this warrior angel, real powerhouse.
That's a pretty accurate image. The video really portrays him as a fierce defender of God's will, leading the fight against Satan and his forces.
Right.
And it even suggests a special connection between Michael and the nation of Israel.
Okay.
Hinting at his role in protecting them, especially in the context of prophecies about the end times.
So he's not just a warrior, he's also a guardian, specifically for Israel. That's really interesting. What about Gabriel? We touched on him briefly earlier.
Yeah.
I'm eager to learn more.
Well, the video highlights Gabriel's primary role as a messenger.
Okay.
Think back to his appearances in the Bible, She shows up at these crucial moments, delivering divine messages to individuals like Daniel, Zechariah, and Mary.
Right.
And each of these encounters leads to, really significant events in biblical history.
Yeah, he always seems to be the bearer of huge news, especially announcements that herald major changes or pivotal moments. I would imagine being on the receiving end of one of his messages would be pretty intense.
I can only imagine.
Right.
And one thing that's interesting is how the video emphasizes the personal nature of Gabriel's communication.
Oh, okay.
He addresses those he visits by name, adding a layer of intimacy and intentionality to these divine messages.
It's like God saying, I see you, I know you, and I have a specific message just for you.
Right.
It's kind of humbling and empowering at the same time.
It really is.
Yeah.
And this idea of personalized communication from God ties into another key point that the video makes. It reminds us that we need to be open and receptive to those messages.
Yeah.
Even when they arrive in ways that we don't expect or understand.
Yeah, sometimes we might resist or question God's plans because they don't align with our own ideas or desires.
Right, exactly. And the video uses the story of Lot and his family's escape from Sodom as an illustration of this.
Okay.
They received very specific instructions from the angels.
Right.
And even though those instructions might have seemed odd or inconvenient, their obedience ultimately led to their salvation.
It's like sometimes it's about surrendering to those divine nudges, trusting that God knows the best route, even if it looks like a detour to us.
Exactly. Now, we've been talking a lot about angels in a very positive light, focusing on their roles as protectors and messengers.
Right.
But there is another side to this story.
Okay.
A darker side that we can't ignore.
You're talking about the fallen angels, right? The ones who rebelled against God. I have to admit, that whole idea has always been so fascinating to me. It's hard to wrap my head around the concept of angels, these seemingly perfect beings,
Right.
choosing to turn away from God. Like, what went wrong?
It's a profound mystery. And while this video doesn't go super deep into the intricacies of fallen angels, it does mention Lucifer,
Right.
who's often identified as the leader of this rebellion.
Lucifer, the once exalted angel who became Satan. Talk about a fall from grace. It really makes you wonder about like the nature of good and evil, the complexities of free will, and the consequences of choices, even for beings as powerful as angels.
Definitely raises some really profound questions.
Yeah.
And while this video doesn't provide, definitive answers,
Right.
it does serve as a reminder that the angelic realm isn't entirely composed of benevolent beings.
Right.
There's this darker side,
Right.
a force that actively opposes God and seeks to disrupt his plans.
So it's like this cosmic battle is playing out, like a spiritual struggle between good and evil with angels on both sides of the conflict.
Yeah, that's one way to interpret it.
Wow.
And it suggests that our world
Yeah.
and even our own lives might be caught in the crossfire of this unseen war.
Okay, that's getting pretty intense.
Yeah, it is a lot to process. It's important to approach these concepts with a balanced perspective. Not every challenge or setback we face is necessarily a sign of demonic activity.
Right.
But it's also wise to acknowledge that there are spiritual forces at play that can influence our world and our lives.
So it's about finding that balance between awareness and discernment, right? Like recognizing the reality of the spiritual realm without giving into fear or paranoia.
Exactly. Ultimately, our greatest protection lies in cultivating a strong relationship with God, trusting in his guidance, and relying on his strength. That's our most powerful defense against any negative spiritual influence.
So it's like building up our spiritual immune system so we're less susceptible to those spiritual viruses.
I love that analogy. Yeah, it highlights the importance of prioritizing our spiritual well-being alongside our physical and emotional health.
Right. So circling back to the video, we've covered a lot of ground about angels, their power, their various roles, the concept of fallen angels. Is there anything else that stands out to you from this exploration?
Yeah, one thing I find really interesting is how this video blends information from both the Bible and extra-biblical texts like the Book of Enoch.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't explicitly endorse the Book of Enoch as, authoritative.
Right.
But it uses it to elaborate on certain ideas about angels and their hierarchy.
So it's kind of like using multiple sources to paint a more complete picture.
Exactly.
Even if those sources might have different levels of authority or credibility.
Yeah, and I think that's an important lesson for us as we navigate information in general, right? We should always approach things with a critical eye. Examine sources carefully, consider different perspectives, and form our own conclusions based on the evidence that's presented.
It's like being a spiritual detective, like piecing together the clues.
Yes, I love that.
All right, so we've delved into this fascinating world of angels, exploring their power, their diverse roles, and even the concept of fallen angels. But I'm curious, where do we go from here? Like, how do we apply this knowledge to our own lives?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And I think each listener will probably find their own unique answers.
Sure.
But I can offer a few thoughts to ponder.
Okay.
First, this exploration of angels can really deepen our understanding of God's character.
Okay.
And his immense love for us. It shows us that he's not distant or detached.
Right.
He's actively involved in our lives, working behind the scenes, even when we're unaware.
That's comforting to know, It's like God's got our backs, both literally and figuratively.
Exactly. And secondly, I think this deep dive can inspire us to be more aware of the spiritual realm.
Okay.
To be more attuned to those subtle signs of God's presence and his work in our lives.
Right.
It might be through angelic intervention or it might be through other means.
It's like we're tuning into a different frequency, opening ourselves to a deeper level of perception and understanding.
I love that. That's beautiful. And finally, this exploration of angels reminds us that we're part of something so much bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
We're not just isolated individuals navigating a random and meaningless world.
Right.
We're connected to this vast spiritual reality.
Yeah.
Cosmic drama that's been unfolding for millennia.
It's humbling and awe-inspiring at the same time, like realizing we're characters in this epic, ongoing story.
Exactly. And as we continue to explore this story, both through the lens of Scripture and through our own experiences, I believe we'll discover that there's always more to learn, more to uncover, and more to marvel at.
I completely agree. This deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about.
It has.
But before we wrap up, I have one last question, a slightly playful one.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So the video talks about God assigning angels to protect us. but it doesn't really specify like how many angels each person gets. So I'm wondering, do you think it's a one angel per person situation, or could we have a whole entourage of heavenly guardians looking out for us?
That's a really fun crokin.
Yeah.
And unfortunately one that the video doesn't directly answer.
Right.
But I think it's safe to say that God's provision for our protection is abundant.
So maybe it's not just one guardian angel. Maybe it's a whole team of celestial specialists.
Maybe.
A spiritual SWAT team dedicated to our well.
Perhaps. And I think that's a beautiful image to leave our listeners with.
Yeah.
The idea that we're surrounded by this multitude of unseen forces, all working for our good, all committed to our safety and flourish.
That's a really comforting thought. Now, before we let you go, I want to leave you with one final thought, something to really mull over.
Okay.
The video we explored focuses on angels as protectors,
Right.
which is, a central aspect of their role. But it also hints at their involvement in God's grand plan,
Right.
particularly in relation to prophecy and the end times.
Yes.
It mentions Michael's role in protecting Israel and Gabriel's messages about the coming Messiah. It's like these angelic actions are woven into the very fabric of human history, shaping events and guiding us towards some ultimate purpose.
Exactly. And that raises a fascinating question.
Yeah, that's that.
If angels are actively involved in the unfolding of God's plan, what role might they be playing in our world today?
Right.
Are there events, movements, or even individuals who might be influenced or guided by these unseen forces?
Oh, wow. It's like, are there modern-day Daniels or Marys out there receiving messages from angels that could change the course of history?
It's definitely an intriguing possibility.
Yeah.
And I think it challenges us to look beyond the surface of events, to consider the unseen forces that might be at work, and to be open to the possibility that God is orchestrating things in ways we can't fully comprehend.
So it's like, don't just read the headlines, read between the lines.
Yes.
Look for those subtle signs of divine intervention, those moments where something extraordinary seems to be happening.
Exactly. And who knows? Maybe you'll even find yourself playing a part in that grand story, guided by unseen hand, contributing to something much bigger than.
That's a really inspiring thought to end on. Well, folks, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the angelic realm.
We have.
I hope you've come away with a newfound appreciation for these powerful and mysterious beings.
And I encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep seeking out those glimpses of the divine that are all around us. Until next time, may you be blessed with wisdom, wonder, and a sense of the extraordinary.
Yeah, it really does make you wonder, like what if we're surrounded by these unseen forces and they're kind of playing a role in events that seem completely normal on the surface. It's almost like this hidden layer of reality that we're just starting to get a glimpse of.
I think that's part of what makes this whole topic so fascinating. It really pushes us to consider these possibilities beyond, our limited human perception.
Right.
To acknowledge that there might be more going on than meets the eye.
Yeah, it's a good reminder to stay humble, I think. To acknowledge that we don't have all the answers and that there are forces at work that are beyond our full comprehension.
Absolutely. And, this video we've been exploring has covered a lot of ground, from the different types of angels to their roles and even the concept of fallen angels. But there's one aspect that I think is worth kind of revisiting.
Okay.
And that's the idea of angelic protection.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's a theme that's been woven throughout this whole discussion. We've talked about angels as guardians, protectors, even kind of like a spiritual SWAT team watching over us. It's a comforting thought, but I have to admit, it also raises some questions for me.
Yeah, I understand. It's a complex topic, and it's natural to have questions.
Yeah.
What specific questions are you thinking about?
Well, for one, if God has assigned angels to protect us, why do bad things still happen? Why do people we love get sick or get hurt or experience tragedy? Does that mean God's protection has failed?
Those are tough questions. And there are no easy answers. But I think it's important to remember that God's protection doesn't always manifest in the ways that we might expect.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean we'll be shielded from all harm or hardship.
Right. So it's not like we're walking around in these like impenetrable bubbles, immune to the realities of life, right?
Right. Life is full of, challenges and uncertainties. But I believe that even in those difficult moments, God's protection is still at work.
Yeah.
It might manifest in ways that we don't immediately recognize. Maybe it's the strength that we find to endure, or the comfort we receive from others, or the unexpected help that arrives just when we need it most.
It's like those times when you look back on a tough situation and you realize that, wow, it could have been so much worse. And you get the sense that something or someone was watching over you.
Exactly. And maybe that's part of what angelic protection looks like. Not necessarily preventing all suffering, but guiding us through it, supporting us, and helping us to emerge stronger on the other side.
I like that. It makes me think of that verse from Psalm 91. He will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. It doesn't say to guard us from all harm, but to guard us in all our ways.
That's a great observation. And I think that verse really encapsulates the essence of angelic protection. It's about, guidance, support, and presence, even in the midst of life's inevitable storms.
It's like having a spiritual safety net. Knowing that even when we stumble or fall, there's something there to catch up.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And, this idea of angelic protection connects to something else we've touched on in this deep dive.
Okay.
The idea of God's constant presence in our lives.
Right, yeah. We talked about how this exploration of angels can deepen our awareness of God's involvement in our everyday lives. It's not just about huge, miraculous intervention. It's about recognizing those subtle signs of his presence, those moments where we sense his love and care surround.
Exactly. And I think angelic protection is one way that God's presence manifests in our lives. It's a tangible expression of his love and care for us.
So maybe it's not always about seeing angels with our physical eyes, Maybe it's about feeling their presence, sensing their guidance, and trusting that we're not alone in this journey.
I think that's a beautiful takeaway from this deep dive. We might not have all the answers about angels or their nature or their specific roles in our life, but we can find comfort and assurance in knowing that God's love surrounds us and that he has provided for our protection and well-being in ways that we might not always fully comprehend.
Yeah, that's a very reassuring thought, especially in a world that can often feel pretty chaotic and unpredictable.
It is, and I think that's a good place for us to wrap up this deep dive.
Well, folks, we really hope you've enjoyed this exploration of angels as much as we have. It's been a journey full of awe and wonder and some really thought-provoking questions.
And remember, the journey doesn't end here. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep seeking out those glimpses of the divine that are all around. Until next time, may you be blessed. Peace, joy, and a sense of extraordinary